Hazel Bennett navigated the bustling sidewalks of the city with a quiet determination, her scuffed shoes tapping a steady rhythm against the pavement. The worn leather had seen better days, telling tales of long hours and a modest lifestyle that Hazel embraced with pride. Today, she was treating herself, a rare indulgence. The sleek facade of Eastwood designer boutique gleamed in front of her, a stark contrast to her humble attire. She hesitated for a moment on the threshold, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Inside the boutique, the air was thick with the scent of fine leather and a hint of jasmine from a fresh floral arrangement near the entrance. Shelves displayed handbags and shoes that shimmered like jewels under soft lighting. Hazel's fingers brushed gently over a delicate silk scarf, contemplating it as a birthday gift for her mother. She was no stranger to the quiet longing life imposed when money was tight, but she refused to let it dictate moments like this. Behind the counter, the store manager, tall, impeccably dressed with a precise comb-over and sharp eyes that missed little, watched Hazel closely. His name was Martin Grayson, and in his view, the boutique's reputation was paramount. When he noticed Hazel's battered shoes and lingered look at an expensive handbag, suspicion crept into his posture. As Hazel reached for a perfume bottle, Martin's voice cut through the boutique's hushed elegance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His tone was polite but carried a subtle edge. Before Hazel could answer, Martin stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Just a reminder, we have strict security measures here." His gaze flicked downward to Hazel's shoes, then back to her face. "Please don't cause any trouble." Hazel blinked, stunned. She shook her head gently, beginning to speak, but her words were interrupted by a sharp bark from the security staff summoned discreetly nearby. "You're mistaken," Hazel said softly, her voice steady despite the growing knot of discomfort. "I'm just here to shop." Martin's lips pressed together in a thin line as his suspicion hardened into accusation. "We've had incidents recently. We'll have to ask you to wait while we check your belongings." The boutique's glimmering atmosphere shifted abruptly, and Hazel felt the weight of eyes turning her way. The cold sting of humiliation crept up her spine just as footsteps echoed, those of the police arriving on cue, and with them, the first true test of Hazel's resolve. The moment the security staff closed in around Hazel Bennett, the boutique's polished veneer cracked, revealing an uncomfortable tension beneath the pristine surface. Hazel's heart pounded, but outwardly she remained composed, though the sharp sting of humiliation settled heavily on her shoulders. She glanced around at the curious eyes of other customers, some filled with thinly veiled suspicion, others with quiet sympathy. The low murmur of whispered conversations rose into a buzz, an invisible chorus of judgment that settled over the elegant rows of designer bags and silk scarves. "Please cooperate," the security guard said firmly, his hands folded in front of him as if holding back the urge to be rough. His eyes flicked to Martin Grayson, the boutique manager, who stood behind the counter with a protective posture, his gaze fixed on Hazel like a hawk watching its prey. "I haven't taken anything," Hazel said, her voice low but clear despite the humiliation clawing at her throat. She looked down briefly at her scuffed shoes, feeling their worn leather a sudden, harsh symbol of how little she belonged here in this world of luxury and glamour. She had only wanted a simple gift, a token for her mother's birthday, a way to share a small joy. Martin's lips curled in a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Bennett," he said smoothly, as if rehearsing the words, "there have been several thefts recently, and it's our responsibility to ensure the security of our products. We ask you to wait here while we confirm there's nothing amiss." Hazel's cheeks burned as a few nearby customers shifted awkwardly, their stares lingering far too long. One woman, with a glossy handbag and pearl earrings, raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with the person beside her. Hazel's breath caught in her throat. Why did they assume the worst? Was it the worn shoes, the threadbare coat, or simply because she stood apart from their world? A young man, probably a clerk still in training, approached, holding out a polite but hesitant hand. "Ma'am, would you mind showing us your bag?" Hazel shook her head firmly, summoning every ounce of calm she could muster. "There's nothing to show," she said carefully. I'm happy to cooperate, but I ask that you treat me with respect. Martin stepped forward, his voice slightly louder now. We are just doing our duty. The security staff began a cursory search of Hazel's belongings. Her purse was small and light, her shopping bag contained only a neatly folded scarf, the one she had intended to purchase. The act should have been simple, unremarkable, but the accusation hung over her like a cloud. Hazel's thoughts raced as the guards fingered through her things. Each passing second deepened her humiliation, the steady drip of whispered commentary in the background only worsened her plight. Why now? Why here? She felt the sting of tears threatening to spill as she met the eyes of a child nearby, who looked up at his mother with puzzlement. Hazel forced herself to breathe deeply, steady her shaking hands. Her resolve did not go unnoticed. A woman near the back of the boutique, dressed in a light gray coat and simple silver necklace, whispered something to her companion, her eyes warm with quiet empathy. But no one stepped forward, not yet. The arrival of the uniformed police officers punctuated the tense scene dramatically. 2 officers entered with deliberate calm, their badges gleaming under the boutique's lights. The senior officer approached Hazel, his expression professional but kind. We received a report of a possible theft, he said, nodding to Martin. Miss Bennett, will you come with us so we can clarify this matter? Hazel's chest tightened, but she nodded, knowing resistance would only worsen perceptions. I've done nothing wrong, she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Martin's satisfied smile deepened as the officers gestured for Hazel to follow them to a small room near the back. The boutique's customers watched with growing interest and a few exchanged murmurs speculating about the situation. The murmurs grew louder, the shifting attitudes of the crowd creating an undercurrent of tension Hazel was keenly aware of. As the door closed behind her, Hazel's thoughts churned in isolation. She had always been careful, cautious with her modest means, and today she had dared to step out of her usual boundaries, only to be met with unwarranted suspicion. The kindness of strangers was a faint hope, barely flickering amid the hostile assumptions of authority. From the room's small window, Hazel caught sight of the boutique staff gathering near the entrance. Martin's posture shifted, more relaxed now that he believed his accusation held weight. Yet, beneath the confidence, there was an unmistakable flicker of unease. Hazel's phone, left in her purse, vibrated quietly, a message from someone named Lucas. Her fiancé. She hadn't expected him today. Her fingers traced the smooth screen, contemplating whether to respond immediately. As the officers continued asking her questions, probing gently into where she had been and why the manager suspected her, Hazel could feel the walls closing in. There was no evidence against her, yet the power dynamics pressed down relentlessly. The fear of her reputation being tarnished gnawed at her dignity. Outside the room, a quiet commotion began. Customers who had been indifferent now whispered about the unfolding event. Some seemed conflicted, unsure if they should intervene or observe. Others treated the spectacle as entertainment. An elderly man approached the information desk, lowering his voice to speak with the clerk. The message was clear: unfair judgments based on appearances remained a common, painful reality. Hazel's mind flicked back to a conversation from long ago with her grandmother, who had told her, "Never let anyone define who you are, Hazel. Your worth is in your heart, not your shoes." That simple wisdom anchored her. She wasn't alone, even if the boutique's golden walls felt like a cage. Minutes stretched like hours until the door opened again, and a familiar figure entered. Lucas, the regional director of the brand and Hazel's fiancé, stepped inside with assured calm. His tailored suit and composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the tense atmosphere, but his eyes held warmth as they met Hazel's. "I've just acquired controlling shares in this company," he announced quietly to the officers, "and I'm here to ensure this situation is resolved fairly." Martin's confident smirk faded when Lucas's presence registered. The boutique manager shifted uneasily, sensing the shift in power dynamics. The officers relaxed, exchanging glances before stepping back to allow Lucas to take charge. Hazel's pulse quickened with a mixture of hope and relief. He moved to her side, offering a reassuring smile. "Let's get this cleared up," he said softly, his voice steady. Hazel glanced at Lucas, feeling a surge of gratitude mingled with disbelief. The man she loved had stepped into her turmoil with strength and resolve. Outside, the boutique's atmosphere began to change. The crowd grew quieter, uncertainty replacing their earlier judgment. Hazel and Lucas exchanged a quick look, one that spoke volumes, a silent promise that this chapter was not over, but together, they would face whatever came next. As the boutique manager's expression darkened and the police officers withdrew, Hazel felt the first stirring of courage rise within her. The path ahead remained uncertain, but the strength to walk it was no longer hers alone. As listeners follow Hazel's journey through prejudice and dignity, consider your own experiences with unfair judgment. Have you ever been misjudged based on appearances or assumptions? What gave you the strength to keep going? Stay tuned to explore how Hazel confronts the challenges ahead and claims her truth. Hazel sat quietly in a reserved corner of a nearby cafe adjacent to the boutique, the noise of clinking cups and soft conversation surrounding her like a comforting cocoon after the tension inside Eastwood designer boutique. She clutched a small cup of chamomile tea between her hands, the warmth seeping into her skin, but it barely touched the knot of turmoil that twisted in her chest. The scuffed shoes she wore felt heavier than ever, as if burdened with the weight not just of her worn-out life but of the scorn and assumptions that had been heaped upon her. Lucas, her fiancé, and now a powerful figure behind the brand, sat opposite her, his posture calm but his eyes reflecting concern. He had insisted on sitting with her until this storm passed, a quiet sentinel amid the swirling doubts and accusations. Hazel looked away, fingers tracing the chipped edge of the saucer. "I never imagined something like this could happen," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I was careless, but because of how they saw me. Like my shoes made me a thief." Lucas reached across the table, his hand lightly covering hers. "It's not your fault," he said gently. "But unfortunately, appearances can cloud judgment. Martin, he's been managing these stores a long time. His world is all about image and control." Hazel swallowed hard. "And me, I don't fit into his world." She paused, battling a surge of frustration that rose cruelly alongside self-doubt. Was she too small a pawn in a corporate game she had never wanted to play? Did she lack the dignity or power to defend herself? The indignity of being misjudged gnawed at her, threatening to swallow her pride whole. Lucas's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "I've already taken steps to protect you, and the company's customers, from this kind of treatment." Acquiring controlling shares wasn't just a business move. It's a promise that no more Hazel Bennetts will be wrongly accused. Hazel looked up, meeting his gaze. "But Martin won't back down easily. He's arrogant, convinced he's right. What if this ruins me? What if people believe him over me?" "The truth has a way of coming out," Lucas said earnestly. "And I'll be by your side to make sure it does." Despite the comfort Lucas's words offered, Hazel felt the sting of isolation more acutely than before. Her coworkers, friends, and community, those who once laughed with her over coffee and shared small victories and frustrations, seemed distant now. The incident had reached whispered gossip, those subtle looks colored by suspicion and misunderstanding. She replayed the scene, the hostile glances, muted conversations, even the subtle shake of heads when she passed on the street. The boutique might be a single battleground, but the war stretched far beyond polished storefronts and security cameras. In the days that followed, Hazel found herself reflecting deeply. Her dreams to live authentically and unapologetically threatened to falter beneath the burden of public misjudgment. Small cracks of doubt threatened to fracture her resolve. Yet, there was a different voice inside her, quieter at first but growing stronger. That voice urged her to rise above, to reclaim her narrative. She thought back to her grandmother's advice: "Your worth is in your heart, not your shoes." Those words were a lifeline, a reminder that appearances could never capture the fullness of one's spirit. Meanwhile, Martin Grayson's resistance was becoming more evident to those watching from the sidelines. He convened meetings with boutique staff, murmuring about protecting the brand, but his tone betrayed a simmering frustration. His influence was challenged like never before. Lucas, wielding his new authority, began introducing reforms quietly but decisively. Staff received new training emphasizing empathy and customer respect, with a clear message from the top: discrimination and prejudice would no longer be tolerated. Hazel, however, remained cautious. She knew changing cold institutional attitudes was a slow, uneven process. She grappled with moments of weary resignation, battling not only the external opposition but the shadows of self-doubt as well. One afternoon, while reviewing documents related to the company's policies in Lucas's office, Hazel allowed herself to voice what had been weighing heavily. "Do you think people will ever stop judging so quickly?" she asked, eyes glancing away. Lucas leaned back thoughtfully, fingers steepled. "Maybe not entirely. But we can create spaces where people feel safe, where fairness isn't optional. This is just the start." Hazel nodded slowly, feeling a flicker of resolve. She drew strength from Lucas's unwavering belief and the small but growing circle of allies quietly standing with her, not just in official capacities but in everyday acts of kindness and understanding. Yet, the strain lingered. The way Martin's shadow still loomed over the boutique reminded her that the battle was far from over. Her heart ached when she thought of the innocent customers who, caught in the crossfire of prejudice, might face similar treatment. Hazel vowed that if she rose from this, it wouldn't be just for herself. It would be for them too. Tensions heightened discreetly one evening when Martin called Hazel into the boutique office. His demeanor was colder than before, his voice laced with disdain disguised as professionalism. "Ms. Bennett, I hope your fiancé's bought shares don't cloud your judgment," he said sharply. "This is a business. Accusations like those you faced aren't trivial. They affect every employee here. You can't expect everyone to just move on." Hazel met his gaze steadily, the flicker of hurt transformed into quiet defiance. "I understand responsibility," she replied calmly. "And I also understand fairness. Your treatment of me wasn't fair. And it threatens the very reputation you claim to protect." Martin's fists clenched at his sides, but before he could respond, Lucas appeared in the doorway. "It's time for new leadership standards," Lucas said steadily. "Respect and equity are non-negotiable." The triad of faces, Hazel's determined, Martin scowling, Lucas's resolute, captured the storm surging beneath the surface. The confrontation ended without further words, but the tension lingered in the air like a gathering storm. Late that night, Hazel sat in the quiet of her apartment, the city lights shimmering beyond the window. Doubts flickered momentarily, but as she gazed down at her worn shoes resting on the floor, they no longer screamed of failure. Instead, they symbolized endurance. The battle for dignity was hard-won and far from over, but Hazel was ready. As Hazel's journey unfolds, what would you do if faced with such unfair treatment? Would you stand quietly beneath the weight of accusations or find the courage to demand respect? Your reflections matter as we continue to follow Hazel's story of resilience and quiet strength. Days had passed since the heated encounter with Martin Grayson, but Hazel Bennett could still feel the electric tension crackling beneath the boutique's polished surface. The atmosphere inside Eastwood Designer Boutique had shifted subtly, whispers of change rippled through the staff, but the undercurrent of unease remained strong. Every glance Hazel caught from some employees seemed weighed down by judgment or cautious resentment, a silent reminder that the struggle was far from over. Lucas, as the newly empowered regional director, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He was methodical, planting seeds for reform, reshaping policies, and making it clear that prejudice and arrogance would no longer have a place in the company. But some battles could not be won on paper alone. One afternoon, Hazel arrived at the boutique to find a meeting had been called, a gathering of the key staff members, including Martin. The room was thick with anticipation and reserved energy when Hazel entered. Staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting nervously. Lucas stood at the front, his posture firm but approachable. His calm authority filled the room. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We've seen how recent events have challenged our values and exposed flaws in how we treat our customers. This simply cannot continue." Martin's eyes hardened as Lucas spoke. There was a war simmering between the old guard's stubborn resistance and the new direction Lucas championed. Hazel remained quietly seated, absorbing the words. She felt fragile but resolute, a growing fire of determination within her chest. This was more than corporate policy, it was about dignity, about standing up against the insidious sweep of bias. Lucas turned his gaze toward Martin. "I know change can be difficult," he said. "But respect and fairness must be the foundation of this brand. We owe it to every customer, especially those who may not fit our narrow expectations." Martin's mouth tightened. "I have managed this store for years. I know what's best for the business." "Knowing what's best doesn't grant you immunity from growth," Lucas replied evenly. "Tolerance has limits, and prejudice isn't part of this company anymore." The room grew silent. Some staff members exchanged hopeful glances while others stared at the floor, the weight of the confrontation palpable. "Hazel," Lucas said, turning toward her, "would you like to share your experience?" Hazel hesitated, her throat dry. Then, gathering her courage, she spoke, voice steady but meaning every word. "That day, when I was accused, without cause, it wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's ever been judged by how they look or what they wear. It was about respect. I hope what happened serves as a lesson, not just in this boutique, but everywhere." A ripple of support moved through the room, some faces softened with newfound understanding. Martin's expression darkened, but the influence he once held was slipping. Lucas's steady presence was a reminder of the changing tides. Outside the meeting, Hazel took a few moments alone, catching her breath. Moments later, the reality hit hard, this was just the beginning. She had spoken her truth, but there would be resistance, moments of doubt, and the slow work of transforming ingrained attitudes. As Hazel emerged from the boutique, a group of loyal customers who had followed the story approached her quietly. "We're sorry that happened to you," one said softly. Another added, "Thank you for standing up." Those words, simple but heartfelt, offered a balm to her bruised spirit. Hazel smiled, feeling a swell of strength drawn from unexpected allies. Just as she was about to leave, Lucas reappeared, joining her beneath the afternoon sun. "This is progress," he said. "But there's a challenge bigger than the boutique itself." Hazel studied his eyes. "What challenge?" "Changing minds. Changing hearts. That takes time and persistence." The realization settled between them. Yet, there was an unexpected twist awaiting them both. As word of Lucas's new leadership and Hazel's public confrontation spread beyond the boutique's glass doors, journalists began to inquire. Social media buzzed quietly with mixed opinions, but a story was forming, a narrative of resilience, misjudgment, and reform. One morning, as Hazel read through comments and shared posts on her phone, a familiar name appeared. Martin Grayson had submitted a formal complaint, alleging that his reputation was being unfairly damaged by Lucas and Hazel's actions. The boutique's internal conflict was suddenly out in the open. The revelation sent shockwaves through the company. Staff divided into factions. Some defended Martin's decades of service, others stood firmly with Hazel and Lucas. A tense meeting was scheduled, this time involving the company's board of directors. Hazel sat in the conference room, surrounded by faces both kind and stony. Martin was there too, confident yet edged with defensiveness. Lucas presented their case with unwavering professionalism, outlining the reforms already underway and the need to foster inclusivity. Hazel listened carefully as Martin spoke, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "I am being cast aside for doing my job," protecting the brand, he said. Accusations and personal agendas cannot dictate corporate policy. But as Hazel met the eyes of the board members, she could see the tide turning. The evidence was clear: Martin's rigid biases had become a liability. The meeting concluded with a decision: Martin would be reassigned, and a new code of conduct emphasizing equality and customer respect would be instituted across all stores. As the news circulated, reactions varied. Some staff expressed relief, others grumbled quietly. Hazel felt the weight of the moment. The victory was significant but fragile. Lucas squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Your courage is changing things," he said softly. Yet, the journey ahead was still full of uncertainties. Hazel walked out of the boardroom into a world that, while shaken, held new possibilities. She realized that the true battle was not just about clearing her name but about ensuring no one else suffered similar injustice. In the quiet aftermath, as the boutique stirred back to life, Hazel felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wouldn't let fear or judgment silence her. Would you stand firm when confronted with bias, knowing the road might be difficult? How do you face moments when truth challenges deep-seated attitudes? As Hazel's story unfolds, reflect on the power of courage and compassion in transforming unfairness into change. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Eastwood Designer Boutique, casting long shadows over gleaming displays of luxury goods. Hazel Bennett stood near the entrance, her posture poised yet relaxed, a calm confidence emanating from her that hadn't been there before. It was the day the boutique would reopen fully under new leadership and a new ethos, one built on justice, respect, and genuine care for every customer, regardless of their shoes or social standing. News of her plight, of the wrongful accusation and the ensuing reforms, had spread steadily throughout the city. Local newspapers had reported on the incident with thoughtful insight, praising Hazel's dignity and highlighting Lucas's decisive action to steer the brand towards inclusiveness. The story was becoming more than a headline. It was sparking conversations about fairness and the assumptions that often lay beneath the surface of daily life. Inside the boutique, staff bustled with renewed purpose, their demeanor noticeably lighter than in previous weeks. Some sought Hazel out with genuine apologies, their faces tinged with regret and respect. Others appeared relieved, as if a great weight had lifted from their shoulders. Martin Grayson was no longer managing any of the company's stores. His reassignment had been made clear: his failure to adapt and his unfair treatment of a customer could not be overlooked. The decision was firm and swift, a signal that the brand was turning a new chapter. Hazel knew this was not just a personal victory, it was a message to all who had been judged unfairly, to all who had felt invisible or devalued. Walking through the aisles, she finally allowed herself to touch some of the merchandise, her fingers gliding gently over the leather of a handbag she had once coveted but never dared to reach for. Her eyes caught a reflection in the boutique's polished glass, a woman with scuffed shoes but untamed dignity. Lucas found her there and offered a warm smile. "You should be proud," he said softly. Hazel nodded, a sense of peace settling in her chest. "It feels right. Like things are finally in place." Together, they moved toward the front of the boutique where a small gathering was taking place. Several loyal customers had returned, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Many brought gifts, handwritten notes, small bouquets, and tokens of support. Their presence was a gesture of solidarity, a thread of community woven through the fabric of Hazel's struggle. One customer, a middle-aged woman named Clara whom Hazel had met in passing, stepped forward. "Your courage made all the difference," Clara said, voice steady. "You reminded us that kindness and fairness should never be optional." Hazel's throat tightened. "Thank you. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that a single moment can change the way we see each other." The boutique's atmosphere was vibrant with renewed hope and understanding. The power of compassion had begun to transform more than just policies, it touched hearts. News cameras arrived later that day to cover the story's resolution. Hazel was asked to share her thoughts on the changes. Standing with Lucas by her side, she spoke with quiet strength. "This experience was painful," she said, "but it's made me more certain than ever that judgment based on appearances can never tell the whole story. We all deserve respect and the chance to be seen for who we truly are." The cameras captured her steady gaze and genuine smile, images destined to inspire and encourage others facing similar battles. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, those who had judged Hazel faced their own reckoning. Martin, stripped of his authoritative role, found himself reflecting on the consequences of his rigid attitudes. The absence of power was a humbling lesson, forcing him to confront the pain his actions had caused. Hazel, on the other hand, felt unburdened. The shadows of accusation no longer hung over her like a shroud. Instead, she carried a quiet pride, not for vindication alone, but for the journey toward justice she had helped illuminate. Her relationship with Lucas had deepened through the ordeal, their bond strengthened by shared challenges and mutual support. He admired her resilience, and she, his unwavering commitment to her and to fairness. One evening, as they walked hand in hand along a riverwalk bathed in golden sunset, Hazel paused to look at him. "I never imagined something so difficult would lead to something so meaningful," she said softly. Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes it's the hardest paths that teach us the most." They shared a moment of peaceful understanding, both grateful for the lessons learned and hopeful for what lay ahead. Hazel's story reverberated beyond the boutique walls, a hope to anyone who had felt diminished or misunderstood. It was a reminder that courage, integrity, and love could challenge injustice and reshape communities. If Hazel's journey touched your heart, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. See you in our next story.